Hey, this is Jeremy, and today we're going to be talking about the Clotting Cascade. So imagine for a moment that you have a blood vessel that has a cut, that has ruptured. Something has happened that has caused your intravascular contents to now become extravascular. So when this occurs, how does your body actually stop that process? How does your body stop the bleeding that's occurring right here? How does it keep all the blood back inside the blood vessels? So the way that it does this is through the clotting cascade. And the end result of the clotting cascade, starting all the way up here at the top, is going to be something called fibrin. Now, fibrin doesn't do this all alone. And what happens is initially, whenever the blood first starts leaking outside the blood vessel, we have this thing right here in the center. This is going to be our platelets. And so what happens is our platelets actually stack along this, along the cut, along the tear in the blood vessel, and they create something called a plug. Okay, and so this plug is made up of platelets. Now this plug is not going to last forever, and it's not very stable. So what it needs is something to help hold it in place, to help keep it stable. And the way that your body does that is through this thing called fibrin. Now, what happens with fibrin is it's very small, and it's not very stable by itself. However, as the more fibrin that you have that starts circulating, the more fibrin strands that you start to develop, because the way fibrin is built is it is built to be able to stack on top of each other very easily to create these strands. Now, what happens is you're not always going to have just fibrin there. You're going to have a couple different things that are going to occur, and if you lack in these things, then your clot isn't going to be very stable. So if this fibrin never gets released, we're going to be strictly relying on the platelets that are circulating in the blood, and again, that's not going to be very stable. So as the fibrin builds up, as the fibrin stacks on top of each other, it's a little bit more stable than the platelet plug, but it still needs a little bit extra help. So what we have is this thing called the fibrin stabilizing factor, which is your 13th clotting factor. And it actually comes in over here and holds your fibrin strands together and keeps them from breaking apart and just makes them that much more stable. And this right here is going to really be the end result of our clotting cascade, because this is what we want. We want our fibrin strands to come in here, help secure the platelets in place, and be held together by the fibrin stabilizing factor, and that is going to return blood flow to its normal behaviors, and it's going to prevent blood from coming to the extravascular environment, which is not what the body needs and not what the body wants. But how does this happen? The very first thing that happens is whenever you have your blood leak out, two things happen. The very first thing is we have our blood meets the collagen. And this collagen sends out a distress signal. And that distress signal sends it to clotting factor number 12, which is circulating through the blood. And so clotting factor number 12 is really where this process starts off. Now, there is a second process that is going on simultaneously with this, and this process occurs whenever you have your tissue factor, or your TF, or clotting factor number 3, which is your tissue thromboplastin. What happens is the TF meets the blood, and it's not just that it meets the blood, it's that it meets something that is circulating in the blood, and that is going to be clotting factor number 7. And so what we have is we have our clotting factor number 3. It meets our clotting factor number 7. And that is how this process starts. Now, going back to our clotting factor number 12, it calls in some friends, and those friends happen to be clotting factor number 11, and they're very close to each other. And so with your clotting factor number 11, it actually causes the release of clotting factor number 9. And so clotting factor number 9 is going to release clotting factor number 10. Except clotting factor number 9 does not do it by itself. So you have clotting factor number 9, and it's going to be paired with clotting factor number 8. Now, clotting factor number 7 comes in here, and it actually helps activate clotting factor number 10 as well. And 10 does not work alone. 10 also works with another clotting factor, just like how 9 and 8 work together. Clotting factor 10 and clotting factor number 5 work together. And the way you can look at this is clotting factor number 12, there's not a whole lot of it. So what it has to do is it has to call its friends to help come and do the job. They get there and they realize that they need more friends, and then each one of those friends have friends, and it's going to build up and build up and build up until eventually you have thousands and millions of these factors that are circulating through. And that's going to be that end result is going to be that fibrin, which builds up into those fibrin strands, which then gets stabilized by the fibrin stabilizing factor. So regardless of your blood meeting the collagen or your tissue factor meeting clotting factor number 7, right here in this extravascular space, they all result in clotting factor number 10 being activated, which works with clotting factor number 5. And just remember, this tissue factor does not run in the blood vessels. This is something that is extravascular and is in the area of the tissues. Clotting factor number 10 is going to lead to the release of your clotting factor number 2, which is your prothrombin or your thrombinogen. What happens at this point is we have our thrombinogen, and it is essentially a triangle with a circle on top. And the reason that it has a circle on top is because it does not want to always be working. This circle kind of acts as a plug, so to speak, and it prevents the triangle from activating everything that it comes in contact with. It prevents the thrombinogen from activating the fibrinogen that occurs. So what happens is whenever clotting factor number 10 stimulates your clotting factor number 2, it causes it to turn into something called thrombin. Now, whenever this thrombin gets released, thrombin really likes fibrinogen. And what fibrinogen is fibrinogen is it is the precursor to fibrin. Now, what happens is, again, we have this plug that's over the fibrinogen, and this is preventing your fibrinogen from stacking, just like what we see up here with our fibrin turning into our fibrin strands. So what happens is we have our thrombin. It actually comes over here and causes this circle to pop off, causes that plug to pop off. And what this results in is our fibrin. Okay, and then as our fibrin gets released, as more of it gets released, we have more fibrin that stacks together that creates these strands. And eventually these strands are going to again get over here close to where the clot is, or close to where that platelet plug is, and it's going to start repairing that blood vessel and preventing that blood from leaking out. Now, this where the blood meets the collagen and the tissue factor meets the blood, these are known as two different processes. Whenever you have your blood meeting the collagen, this is going to be known as the intrinsic pathway. Now, this intrinsic pathway, it just means that clotting factor number 12 is where this signal started. And whenever we get over here to where clotting factor number 3 activated clotting factor number 7, this is going to be known as our extrinsic pathway. And between our intrinsic pathway and our extrinsic pathway, what happens is eventually clotting factor number 10 gets released to stimulate clotting factor number 2, which is going to result in my fibrin and my fibrinogen turning into my fibrin, and our clots actually getting better, and their clots are starting to develop. So keep in mind that we have clotting factors that are circulating all throughout the body, all through your blood vessels, except for clotting factor number 3, which is your tissue factor, which lies very close to the tissues. And as blood leaks out of your blood vessels that get damaged, that tissue factor is going to meet the blood, which is carrying clotting factor number 7, which is your stable factor. And what happens is it activates clotting factor number 10. Clotting factor number 10 stimulates your prothrombin, which pops off the plug, the circle, and converts that prothrombin into thrombin, which then allows your fibrinogen to become fibrin. And as we have circulating fibrin, it allows them to stack on top of each other. And as we develop more fibrin strands in the area of our clot, we have the fibrin stabilizing factor, which is clotting factor number 13, comes into the area to help hold these fibrin strands together and helps the platelet plug that's already developed stay stable and allowing our blood vessels to not leak out any blood. And this is a clotting cascade.